This episode of the podcast is brought to you by J.D. Chapman Insurance Agency. Are you an aspiring business owner or entrepreneur looking to be part of New York's multi-billion-dollar cannabis industry? If so, the decisions you make in these early stages are imperative to your future success. And I'll tell you from personal experience that you will face risk on a daily basis. So it's important to have a comprehensive insurance program in place with a trusted, reliable partner. J.D. Chapman offers special insurance for cannabis growers, medical and adult use dispensaries, edibles manufacturers, testing labs, ancillary businesses, and more. Available coverage includes general liability, product liability, excess liability, and workers' comp. In this exciting and rapidly growing industry, it's important to have a partner you can trust. Contact J.D. Chapman today at 315-986-4062 for all your cannabis insurance needs. J.D. Chapman, from seed to sale, they have you covered.
The views and opinions expressed on this show belong solely to the hosts and their guests and do not reflect the views of any outside institutions unless explicitly stated.
What's up, everyone? My name is Steve Vanderwall, and I'm the host of Cannabis Cum Laude, a podcast devoted entirely to cannabis. This podcast will cover a full spectrum of topics, including cultivation, business, medicine, politics, culture, advocacy, and everything in between. Because let's face it, the cannabis industry is very complicated. It's robust, and it has a ton of moving parts. So it's going to be my job to help you understand it a little bit better. So tune in every week for a brand new episode. And if you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. And if you really, really, really like the show and are interested in sponsoring, please shoot me an email at logistics@cannabiscumlaude.com. Now enjoy the show. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. How about you?
Doing great. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Cannabis Cum Laude, here with a good friend of mine and a friendly face, Rachel Partington, now representing Park Jordan Real Estate. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Very exciting. Lots has happened for you in the last few months. Very exciting stuff. We got a lot to talk about today.
We do.
It's been, today is February 10th? Hell, the date? 10th. It's been a...
it's a blur.
It's a blur. We're shooting an AM episode. It's 11 a.m., 11:06. And it's been a bit of a frustrating week in cannabis if you are in New York. So today I'm really hoping to cover three topics. One, we're going to cover the situation going on in the town of Sweden that you have been handling. Really interesting. Second, we're going to discuss the provisional licensing bill that was recently released by Senator Hinchey. And third, and arguably most controversial, is the new OCM enforcement action and the cease and desist letters that started going out 2 days ago. But first, let's get down to business with the town of Sweden. There's an issue, right, with their permissive referendum process. So kind of before we get into what exactly is going on, give us a quick reminder of what exactly this permissive referendum process is.
Sure. So as we know, under the MRTA, they built in this provision that allowed municipalities, and when I say municipalities, I mean cities, towns, villages. It allowed them to opt out of having retail dispensaries and on-site consumption lounges in their jurisdiction. So under this provision, and this is Article 6 under the MRTA, Section 131, it states that these opt-out laws can be passed, but they're subject to the permissive referendum process. So this is a unique New York State process. It allows the law, once it is passed, to then go up to the public, and they have a period of time where they can submit a petition against this law. And what this petition does is allows the law to go up for a vote. So it's a bit of a complicated process, even though the intention of it is to make it accessible to citizens. It's something where they can take the law into their hands, they can have input on it, and unfortunately, what we're finding is that it's even more complicated than we thought. So how this works, and I mentioned this before on a previous episode, but in case you missed that, for cities and towns, once they pass that opt-out law, there is a 45-day period after that where the law doesn't take effect. And during that period, citizens can compile a petition and submit that. So for that petition, this is, again, just for cities and towns. They need to compile a number of signatures that is equal to at least 10% of the votes cast for governor in the preceding gubernatorial election.
For example, if 1,000 people voted in the last election, you would need to get 100 signatures.
Yes, at least. Yes. So, again, this is for cities and towns. For villages, there is a different metric that they use. So, Municipal Home Rule Law, Section 24, that's the specific law that we're talking about for this permissive referendum process. It's outlined in the MRTA, and it makes this distinction between cities and towns and how a village handles it. Mm-hmm. So that's a separate village law that you use for that. And for that type of a petition, you need to get a number of votes equal to at least 20% of just simply registered voters in the village.
In the village.
So, yeah, so you can see these are very different metrics. So the issue that we're looking at right now in the town of Sweden, there was a group that I've been supporting that wanted to compile a petition. And one of the first steps that you have to take is to find out what were the number of votes cast for governor in the preceding gubernatorial election, and then what's 10% of that. So this group first went to the Monroe County Board of Elections office. That's where you'll find this information, and requested it. And now, fortunately, the Monroe County office had already compiled a spreadsheet with these figures. And in calculating this, they took 10% of the votes cast only in the town of Sweden. Now, their thinking is that it is a town opt-out law that was passed. It's going to affect town residents only. And so that's their scope. Let me find the provision of the law. When it talks about this calculation, the exact sentence states that, let me just pull this up here, they have to be qualified voters first who are signing this petition. So what that means is that they were registered to vote during the preceding general election, and they are residents of that municipality, of such local government. And so you're looking at qualified voters, and for the figure you're reaching, it's 10% of those qualified voters. So again, looking at what the Monroe County Board of Elections office did is looked at qualified voters, meaning residents who are registered in the town of Sweden to vote in the preceding election, and then they took 10% of those people who cast their votes in the preceding gubernatorial election. So it's a mouthful, but it makes sense, because what you're looking at, as I mentioned, in their justification is that this is a town law. It's impacting town citizens, and why this is important is in the MRTA, it actually explicitly states that law only applies to the portion of the town that is outside of the village. So, I've worked as a municipal attorney, and I've gotten a lot of questions on that. A lot of times people think that the village is just simply part of the town. And in many ways, it is not. So when you look at the Department of State definition of a local government, it specifies that you have a municipal jurisdiction of a town and a village separately. Now, there are ways where they can interact with one another, but again, for purposes of a cannabis opt-out law, it's only going to apply to that town, as stated in the MRTA. So the issue that we ended up having in the town of Sweden is that the town issue, when they get that petition, they have to do a review of it. And when they came out with their final statement, they denied the petition, stating that they didn't reach the number of required votes. And the reason why they came up with this conclusion is that they, in calculating that 10%, included votes that were cast by village residents for governor in the preceding gubernatorial election.
So they combine the two.
Yes. So that means that it bumped the signature requirement up from 253 to 423.
And how many signatures did they get?
So this group collected 300 signatures. Now, they knew at the time that there may be some signatures on there where people might have been listed, but were, it was inaccurate or they're no longer registered voters, which is why no matter what, when you're compiling these petitions, you want to get as many signatures as you possibly can. But they were able to get 300. And the certification statement from the town of Sweden had removed 12 of those, or invalidated 12 of them, which this group at this time is not contesting. So that left them with 288 valid signatures. So
what was the originally said? 250?
253. That was the number listed in the Monroe County Board of Elections office spreadsheet.
And they had 25 more, no questions, that was not contested.
Right. Yeah, and you can find this statement for the town of Sweden. They actually posted it on the town of the supervisor's Facebook page. So, so the issue now is that we're looking at a difference in the way that these signatures are calculated. And that's a huge problem because, I think that a lot of people who are compiling these petitions, these efforts have been happening across the state. And, it can get a little confusing as far as the format of the petition. It's not as if the state or municipality say, here's our petition form, take it and run with it. You have to figure out how to compile that yourself. So that's where I came in to assist with this group. And there have been some issues as far as the format, even though the law does state that as far as the format, they only need to substantially comply with the laws. The most important matter is making sure that you have the qualified voters, and in that number, at least 10%. But if we can't even agree on what constitutes 10% of votes cast, that's the foundation of this entire petition. The problem here, and, to be fair, municipalities themselves have stated that they have, they're lacking some oversight from the Office of Cannabis Management on that. And that's what they've cited in their reasons many times for passing these opt-out laws, whether that's fully the case or not. I can't deny or confirm, but I think all around we would benefit from getting some type of guidance from the Office of Cannabis Management on how to conduct these petitions. Now, unfortunately, the statute of limitations on compiling them has passed on many of these laws, which means that a lot of people who were doing their best to get out there to form these efforts, and I will say it's complicated when you're putting that together because it's not just a matter of throwing a party, getting everyone to come and sign. As I said, you have to find out who the qualified voters are, trying to figure out this metric, the 10%. But even beyond that, are you going to canvass? Okay, what are the local canvass laws? Do you need to figure out if there's an issue with soliciting, peddling? There is a lot that has to be considered when you're trying to put together that effort. And I think that only serves to underscore how important it is to have clear guidance on what target you're trying to meet. As I said before, this is a citizen's process. And if citizens, even lawyers, even the state can't figure it out, that's a problem.
And I think that there's always, especially when you're rolling out a new program like this or a new industry that's, it's been done before in other states, but it hasn't been done here. There's going to be things that, the state has done a lot to try to cover a lot of different areas and to try to,
there's so much.
But there's always things you're going to miss. This is something that who would have ever thought something like this would happen? Like, hey, I predict that there's going to be confusion in the way that we calculate qualified voters. It's not anything that you're going to be that you're ever going to be able to plan for. But I
Right.
think if we can figure out a way to say, here's the issue, and go to the governing body and say, hey, we need clarity on this,
Hmm.
because not only is this a problem in Sweden, but it could prove to be a problem. Could it still prove to be a problem elsewhere, or is it because the opt out is now over? Is this kind of a thing of the past?
Yeah, so under the MRTA, it gives this deadline where the local law has to be passed by December 31st, 2021. So that deadline has passed. But if you're a city and town, you have that 45-day period where you can be compiling these signatures. So really that puts us at what, the 14th. So for, let's say you get a municipality who passed on the 31st, that clock's actually still running for them. And I know of some other efforts around the area where people are working on this. I believe in the town of Batavia, they're putting together a petition now in their jurisdiction. Both the Board of Elections office and the town, I believe, took the same approach, that they excluded village voters because, again, in the MRTA, it states this law only applies to the portion of the town outside of the village. And I think why there is confusion is that if you're looking at it from an election law perspective, the argument is that when you're, in a gubernatorial election, they're including the village as part of the town. And so, that's an election matter. That is a consideration. But there are many conflicts that you can face when you're looking at it strictly from that perspective. As I've mentioned, we've said this many times now, this is a town law. So if let's say we're saying that village voters are qualified voters, they can sign that petition. Does that really seem fair? They aren't impacted by that law. And let's say that you have some village residents who are really motivated to, like, let's say if this village opted in, they're really motivated to have business there. They don't want competition in the town next door.
Yep.
They can now have an influence on upholding that opt-out because potentially it could benefit them. Or it could, the village, it's going to benefit them potentially for tax revenue. There's serious conflicts there.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess it seems pretty clear, like you said, it clearly states in the MRTA this difference between the town and village laws.
Yeah, and there have been official statements on that. When you're working on this type of matter, I myself and many other people have approached the Department of State for guidance on this. And they've, I've gotten agreement on this approach. And, we have we have legal organizations in the state that are working on this. And, like to highlight an example where it would make sense to have both town and village voters. Let's say you're having a petition for the consolidation or dissolution of government. So let's say you're getting rid of the village, and now, and that's been actually a trend that's been happening in New York State. You're going to have a law that is dissolving the village. That obviously that's going to impact residents in both jurisdictions. So it makes sense to have them included in the process.
You can dissolve a village?
Yes.
Why would you do that? Or why would that happen?
There are many different reasons why you do that for, tax purposes, for law enforcement purposes. It really has to do with what are your resources and how do you need to allocate them to perform the functions of a municipality. I actually think where we grew up in Maston, I think they dissolved the village there.
Really?
I can't confirm, but like I said, that's been a trend and a lot of conversations about that. And actually, so the Department of State does have a guide for if you're petitioning for that purpose. And, a lot of people used that as a guide when they were trying to develop these MRTA opt-outs. But as I mentioned, it can be problematic because these are different types of laws. So again, it's an area where some guidance would have been beneficial.
Do we have a timeline on, is this something that you think would be ironed out in regulations? Is this something that you think the OCM is going to have to make a special statement on? How does this get solved?
Yeah, I sympathize with municipal attorneys. They're trying to do the best they can. This is a new area of law, and they themselves are trying to reach out for guidance on this. Everyone is. So for many of them, simply an official statement coming from the regulatory body on this, the Office of Cannabis Management, would be beneficial. And I've heard comments to that extent that could potentially impact their decisions or lead to reversals on denials. I think that alone would have a profound effect, because what's happened is that, so this group in Sweden did file an objection, and I know that there was another objection filed for a different but related petition issue in was it the town of Bovina. Now it's up to the court system, and even though the way that they handle this is a type of special proceeding, which means it's streamlined from other types of cases. It still takes a while, and especially if you have citizen volunteer groups who maybe don't have the funds to work with an attorney, and even attorneys are unclear on this type of process, and it's a rare type of action. That's a huge undertaking. So to leave that up to the courts to sort out is that's a big lift, especially when potentially all it could take is a statement from OCM.
I think the moral of the story in all of this, and it's and not just this issue with the town of Sweden, relates to the OCM enforcement action letters that just came out, is we are in desperate need of clarification. And regulations would be a great start. I don't know if you have any idea. Do we have any update on? It's kind of like the question that's like we're all asking, but no one really has
multi-million-dollar question.
They said by the end of Q1.
Yes.
That's the end of next month in early April.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that timeline is realistic? Do you think that's going to happen?
It seems to be changing all of the time, and as you've stated, this is a complicated issue. We're trying to right now. We've passed what is one of the most progressive laws on cannabis in the country, and we're prioritizing social equity and sustainability, climate resiliency, on top of all of these technical and operational aspects. It's a huge lift. So as anxious as I am to get the ball rolling, I do support them taking their time to make sure that they get things right. And, for me, the only reason why I've focused on the opt-outs is because that can have long-term consequences. And we see that in some of the other states. It's actually, the argument has been made in California, and there are a lot of issues we could talk about there. But one of the issues is that currently, I think they still have retail sales banned in around 2/3 of municipalities. So that severely limits their market. And I would argue we don't want to have the same issue here. And so now if we have municipalities opting out, possibly indefinitely, because of a lack of guidance or misunderstandings about cannabis, I mean, it's real. I've heard a lot of problematic conversations behind these opt-outs. That's it. They do have the ability to opt back in. So I would encourage anyone who is in one of these jurisdictions to maybe be a part of that conversation. For some of these, for some of these lawmakers locally, this is very new to them, and they just need to learn a little bit more. They need to meet some of the key players. They need to know what are the interests and how can we build an alliance between the community and the municipality. How can everyone benefit from this? So, there is an opportunity to grow from this and to improve. But if you have, like I said, if you have a town or a city village that's opted out and they plan on staying like that as long as they possibly can, maybe till the end of time, that's it. We're stuck now. So, as I mentioned, I see issues with that in other states, and I just hope that ends up not being the case for us, especially when there's a lack of clarity.
Let's remember that for everybody who, the opt-out says it puts bans on retail dispensaries and outside consumptions, but allows for, you to participate in the supply chain, whether that's cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, just really
Yes.
non-retail and non-consumption type of businesses.
Delivery.
Yep.
Hmm.
So, remember, and cannabis is still legal to possess, it's still legal to consume, yada, yada.
Hmm.
Do you think that towns, or do you know of any town or data of towns or municipalities in other parts of the country that who have opted out from retail and dispensaries have also made it very difficult for people to obtain other supply chain licenses? Is that not possible? Are there hands tied to that? I just wasn't sure if there'd be any correlation in, a town or, like Pittsford, or I think, one of the other towns that opted out, where if you wanted to start a little cannabis cultivation facility, would they make it difficult for you, even though technically it shouldn't be a problem? My guess is that politically it could be complicated to start a business in one of these towns or municipalities that opted out.
I think that's a very real concern. So I wish that we had more research on that in other states, but I think that we can read into what we see a little bit in New Jersey. I think they're at around the same figure, or about 2/3 have opted out. And we're already seeing a lot of frustrations about the licensing process and failure on social equity. And
0 licenses that have given out in the state of New Jersey have went to people of color.
right,
0.
right. Right. So, I don't know, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is more data on this specifically, but I can speak to what the conversations that I've heard. So, I've been on both sides of it. I was representing municipalities when medical was first legalized, and back then, sometimes the conversation was, how far away can we put these dispensaries? And for me, that was a bit awkward, because actually I have nerve damage, and had autoimmune issues at the time, and I benefited greatly from medical cannabis, and my doctors were able to assist me through what other states have done. And so to hear those kinds of conversations and be involved in the lawmaking process that way, that was frustrating. And I know I'm not the only one impacted that way. But then, there are encouraging things. I saw other municipalities that said, this is a pharmacy, but we don't even need to really change the law that much or at all. We'll just put it in as an existing pharmacy use. So, that's great. But now that we're getting to recreational, some of the conversations I'm hearing there are more concerning. I've heard statements that cannabis is simply immoral. I've heard that, some of these arguments that it is a gateway drug, a lot of things that scientists and researchers have worked so hard to debunk, and now they're coming back into the conversation, and they're part of the lawmaking process. That's scary to me.
Yes, that's very scary. I think I think eventually everyone trends, and mostly everyone will trend in the right direction. I think,
Yes, I hope so.
even some of these more conservative municipalities that may not, see the value of cannabis or understand it from that perspective.
Hmm.
A lot of these towns, they value money and tax dollars and jobs. So,
Exactly.
it's, my experience, in Albany, and kind of talking to different politicians and legislators and lawmakers at different sizes. It's all about how you tell the story and who you're talking to.
Yes.
If you're going to the, more of a conservative, right-leaning politician, chances are you're not going to go up there and talk about social justice and social equity. You're going to talk about jobs, money, and agriculture. Where if you're talking to somebody that sits more on the left side of the political spectrum,
Hmm.
that's where you're, so it's all about understanding your audience and knowing your talking points. And,
Right.
it's just, I think eventually we all trend in the same direction. It would be silly not to, because we've said it before. If if you're in Pittsford, even if you opt out, someone's just going to drive down the street to Hemp Soul or to some other dispensary, pick up their products, drive home and consume it,
Hmm.
leaving all their tax dollars in that municipality and none of it for that one. Nobody
Hmm.
wants that. So I think eventually, the numbers that we see in the space are profound. And everybody wants a slice of their pie. And I think eventually that will push everybody in the right direction.
Hmm.
But it's sad that, we're still dealing with such an overwhelming amount of opt-outs around our state right now. It really is a shame.
Right. Yeah, I think I saw the latest figures from the Rockefeller Institute, who's tracking this. It was it 770 opt-outs for retail dispensaries and 885 for on-site consumption. And that's something in other states, on-site consumption does seem to be a bit of a more difficult sell.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised by that, but again, it's frustrating when you hear some of the conversations behind these opt-outs, but we don't want to lose hope because they can opt back in at any point.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, like I said, are learning about this for the first time. So that doesn't mean that conversation can't start.
Yeah.
So I really encourage people to not lose hope.
Yeah, me too. Let's transition into our second topic for today, and that is the new provisional license that was released by Senator Michelle Hinchey, who represents the 46th Senate District. It's Senate Bill S8084, which I will include in the show notes. And the header of this is it provides for conditional adult use cultivator licenses and conditional adult use processor license. And I'll be honest with you, when I first saw this, just like, I'm a big fan of the provisional licensing bill because as a cannabis entrepreneur who's looking to do business in the legal regulated industry, there's a lot of things that have to happen, especially if you're in cultivation or manufacturing, that require capital raising, securing real estate, construction.
Oh, yes.
That is already very risky being in the space, but is way more risky when you're doing it without a license or even knowing when the licenses are going to come out. So this provisional license is essentially the license before the license that says, as long as you stay compliant, you have a license. You can operate and grow pot and manufacture cannabis products now, but you can start building because you're going to get a license in the future as long as you maintain compliance. That's great. That's what we really want. But there's a couple of really big problems with this bill that I have some personal frustrations about, that some of my colleagues and some of my legacy market friends and fellow entrepreneurs have issues with. And that is that this bill essentially will only give provisional licenses to already licensed hemp CBD licensed growers and CBD processors, which for the most part, for a program built on social equity and bridging the gap between the legacy and the regulated market, leaves out all of those people. So I just wanted to kind of get your interpretation on this, kind of break it down from a legal perspective, because I think it is flawed. I don't know what the future of this bill holds. I had a good friend of mine reach out the other day, saying, I just saw the new regulations. What is this? It's leaving out indoor cultivation. I don't have a CBD license. And I said, put the brakes on. It's nothing yet. But if this were to make it to the floor as is and get put up for a bill, it's gonna upset a lot of people and really prevent a lot of people from entering the industry and a lot of indoor cultivators from even being able to cultivate indoors. So what is your kind of take on this whole thing?
Right. So I think the bill was introduced on January 25th, and on February 2nd, I believe they voted to move it to the floor, the agriculture committee. And I watched the video from that, and there was a lot of interesting conversation about those points that you mentioned. And actually, Senator Hinchey herself mentioned this potential issue where a lot of the license holders are white people, and she emphasized that the goal of this is to also include that if you are becoming operational, you need to work with the state's social equity program, mentorship, other forms of support to try to incorporate those social equity elements. But of course, the question is how realistic is that? Are we able to get that set up in time? How can we ensure that we are making social equity happen through that program? Are there other formats that would maybe be more beneficial? There's a lot to consider with this. I mean, if you look at it from an operations perspective, a big part of this industry is technical expertise, being able to have sound standards of practices, general management practices. There's a lot that goes into that. So certainly they may have some more familiarity there, and that's a benefit, and that can help drive our industry here. But issues like you mentioned, if it's only focusing on outdoor and greenhouses, are we limited there? We're in New York State, right? So, there, like I said, there was a lot of good discussion, I think, during that committee meeting, and now that it's been moved to the floor, we'll see if they schedule a vote on it, and I will be following closely.
Yeah, I mean, I think from like an infrastructure perspective, like the currently licensed hemp growers and hemp processors probably are the best go to market folks for people who already have, greenhouses set up or land set up or
Hmm.
CBD processing facilities. If we're looking to get the industry off the ground expeditiously, it probably makes the most sense on paper to go to them. Right.
And they're still little guys in a sense, they're
Totally.
not typically multi-state operators,
But
but
but here's where I think is probably the biggest problem, right? Obviously, I don't believe that licenses should go to hemp growers and processors right off the bat. I think that there's a lot of people in the legacy market and who qualify as social equity applicants that would get left out of this. Okay, that's
mhm.
one thing. But as a indoor cultivator and someone who has friends who a lot of them who are indoor craft cultivators, to only allow artificial lighting during the vegetative process, which means during flower you can't
Right,
use
saw
artificial
that.
light, which means you can't do completely controlled environmental agriculture. You're leaving out the indoor growers. And I don't care what anybody says. Okay, from a sustainability perspective, sure, outdoor cultivation for the most part is much more sustainable. Okay, fine. But in terms of quality of end product and the product that's actually going to sell, the best cannabis in the world is cultivated under pristine, precise environmental conditions, not a greenhouse and certainly not outside. So by not only leaving out the indoor craft cultivators, right, allowing them to still do their thing in the legacy market because they're going to,
Mhm.
you're now allowing the hemp farmers to get up who've already had a tough go of it. If you're in the CBD business in New York, you've had a tough go of it. Not a lot of people made money. Most people
It's true.
lost their ass.
Mhm.
Okay. You're now introducing them to this whole market. They're going to have to pay the fees. They're going to have to pay the taxes. They're going to have to do all this and navigate all the red tape at the end of the day just to produce an inferior product, which is probably going to be priced just the same or higher as the underground craft product because of the taxes and the red tape and the
Mhm.
compliance. I believe this bill sets the hemp farmers and processors up for failure because you're forcing it to compete with the people who are objectively creating a superior product, and they're going to continue to do it in the underground market. And it worries me because there's a lot of farmers in this space who got into CBD thinking that they were going to make a big buck, realized quickly that it was quite the opposite, and are now planning on trying to save their ass or recover what they've lost in the THC industry, only to find out that they're now going to have to compete with the big dogs, the craft
Mm.
cultivators. And
Mhm.
I do think that is a real concern. Um, and I just can't wrap my head around why you would prohibit artificial lighting. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, this the sustainability aspect is huge, and that's where it just gets into this balancing test all of the time, where we're looking at how do we meet sustainability, how do we meet social equity, and how can we best be operational. It's very tricky. And for if you're focusing on social equity, if you're focusing on legacy, I wonder how much research has been done into how they're growing. So, I would say my hunch is that most of the people in the legacy market, at least from the conversations I've heard, are growing indoors, and they would also qualify as social equity applicants, and they're getting really scared that they're going to get left out. And to a mentorship program could be very beneficial. I mean, I've benefited from mentors. I
No
mentor
doubt.
others. I truly believe in that. But for some people, it feels a little patronizing to have to enter this market through that channel when they've been growing. And and many of the people I've spoken with really want to learn more about SOPs, GMPs, as far as what are the regulatory bodies that are going to be looking at that. Because if you're legacy, it's not like you're dealing with DEC. It's not like you're dealing with EPA, and EPA, I mean, that's at the federal level. So really in New York State, I don't think you'll be interacting with that much right now, but there are some cases where EPA might come in. Let's say you're dealing with a brownfield site, a Superfund. This is under EPA jurisdiction. So certainly there's a lot of education that people want at that level, but is mentoring the best first step towards social equity? I don't know. These are just a lot of questions that we have right now.
Yeah, and I'm curious. Like, I think mentoring, just like you, is one of the most valuable things you can do as a business owner. It will help you get to A through C much faster than doing all the trial and tribulations and bullshit and failing and getting back up. Getting a mentor is one of the most valuable things that you can do. But what does that mentorship program look like?
Yes.
And,
excited to see that.
We have a bunch, it looks like to me, if I wouldn't necessarily consider CBD farmers and CBD processors legacy market operators. I'm sure there's people in there that have, but right. But are these kind of newer business people going to be mentoring the legacy and social equity market, which has probably been doing this a lot longer underground than a lot of, maybe I'm speculating and all,
but that would be an interesting tension.
Yeah, it seems interesting because it's almost like it needs to be some mutual mentorship where, the legacy mentors on the craft and the new market mentors on, this is how you run an above ground business. This is a bookkeeper. This is how you do things. So I do feel if we can figure out how to do it mutually, then we can. It does sound patronizing at first, and people are probably like, "What the fuck do I need mentorship for? I've been doing this underground for 20 years, and now some." It's interesting.
The mutual mentorship. I really like that, Steve. You might need to start calling people.
I have to call Hinchey after this. Hey, I got an idea. I don't know. I do think, and we don't have to get into it. I do think a lot of the advocacy in this state, especially regarding industry, has been siloed by a small handful of organizations that I don't believe truly represent the legacy market or the craft cannabis market. That's neither here nor there, but it does seem, I think, while a provisional licensing bill allowing manufacturers and producers to getting on right now is great, but limiting it to a handful of people who I think are leaving out a whole group of people who are arguably more qualified is going to give a fatal blow to the industry. But I do think it is far from becoming any sort of law. I wouldn't really encourage anybody to panic right now. You know who you are, my friend. He called me in a panic yesterday. But it is something to keep your eyes out if you are an indoor cultivator, if you are not a licensed CBD grower or CBD processor and are interested in entering the THC space as a grower or processor. These are things to pay attention to because it could affect your future.
And we want to establish other kinds of supports. We don't have to wait on the Office of Cannabis Management. As we've stated, they have a lot they're trying to tackle. We can start building those supports now. I know that a lot of community colleges have been doing a lot of work, and maybe eventually they become an official part of the social equity program. I know FLCC in particular has been doing a lot.
Great program.
Yes, to develop their program. And actually, I'm going to be guest speaking in Glenna Colapretti's class on Friday.
Nice.
On regulations. Yeah, nice. I mean, those students, I'm so knocked out by them. They know a lot.
They know.
Again, mutual mentorship, right?
Yeah, that's I taught a couple classes for her last quarter too.
Yeah.
And, going through talking about, the basics of cultivation and the basics of edibles and product manufacturing. And these kids, I was learning while I was teaching. I was like, wait,
exactly.
Really? Wait, really? That's so cool. And they fought. I mean, it was.
Yeah. And criminal procedure too. I mean, oh my gosh. A lot of them. I was like, No, you couldn't have gone to law school. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I have two of my closest friends are teachers, and one of them particularly is just struggling with teaching right now. It's
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 hard.
it's a
My mom
tough,
is a teacher.
it's an overwhelming job, and he's having a lot of trouble with kids having interest in school and getting through to them, and then
Can't
you
imagine.
turn around and you teach a class like this where they're all interested, like genuinely
Yes.
interested and asking questions, and like,
Yeah.
wow, this is so fun. It's so rewarding.
Yeah.
And I wish that, in all aspects of education, kids were that enthused, but it was really
Mm.
refreshing to,
Mhm.
as I'm sure you probably saw, talk to these kids who actually give a shit. It was awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, just one point on that, I was listening to a really interesting books. I do audiobooks, and it's The Year of Living Danishly, and it talked about the Danish education system and how for college they actually provide stipends or pay students to go to college and take classes, and they talked about how that really motivates not just having that, but also the safety nets that come later in Danish society. People are able to take classes that they care about. I mean, imagine if you're taking classes because it's something you're passionate about, not only, not
Yeah.
just because you're trying to find something you can earn an income
Yeah.
on. And I think that the cannabis industry is one place where we can start developing more of that. And, we don't have all of the safety nets that they have in a place like Denmark, but we can, there's been a lot of movement towards that. The child tax credit, talks about UBI, which we can talk about later. But, at the very start, just having students learn what it feels like to be able to go towards something they're passionate
Yeah.
about, that's huge.
Yeah, and learning how to find that passion early on. We know that there's
Yes.
this critical learning period in kids when they're young and their brains are much more malleable and they're still growing. And why
Mhm.
you can learn a language before you're 12 easily, but after
Yes.
that it becomes challenging.
Mhm.
That applies to learning in general. So
Mhm.
if you could figure out how, when these kids are, just entering the school system, what are you passionate about? Oh, it's
Yeah.
music and theater. Let's have you in a track more designed for that. Oh, you like engineering and building and Legos? Okay, let's put you here. Oh,
Yes.
you like cannabis or plants? I mean, imagine how much farther kids would be if they got into it that young and
Oh,
actually
yeah.
had that fire lit when they
Yeah.
were just kids. I mean,
Avoid burnout. I
yeah,
mean, that'll
yeah,
translate
yeah,
into more income.
no doubt. Yeah, it would be transformational in our society, I think.
Yeah, and we can teach people that
We
in
can.
the cannabis
Yeah.
industry.
Amen. Um, and let's move on to our third and final discussion point today, something that has been a buzz, to say the least, in our New York cannabis community. And that is the Office of Cannabis Management Enforcement and Cease and Desist letters that just started going out the other day.
Mhm.
This came to my attention. Somebody posted it, a screenshot from the Office of Cannabis Management website, and I'll also put this link to this article in the show notes. But long story short, this is what the heading says: cease and desist letters sent to suspected violators making clear cannabis sales, including gifting, which are only allowed by licensed dispensaries. And we all know right now that not only are there no regulations, but there are no licenses. So a lot of, this gifting market and stuff, which was gray for a while, seems to be increasingly clear that it no longer is gray, that it is in fact illegal, to
Mhm.
the point where they're now taking enforcement. A lot of panic. I know there's, a handful of honestly really great dispensaries, sticker shops, gift shops, whatever you want to call them, in our community, that for the most part are trying their best to act as close to compliance as possible. But a lot of people got impatient. I don't blame them there. But what does this all mean for this
Mhm.
industry that's really kind of taken the bull by the horns and kind of went on without the OCM's approval? What does this type of enforcement mean for the community and for the industry?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think that I know a lot of people were worried about it. A lot of people are trying to develop plans and trying to figure out a way to earn income on a scale where they can compete with the larger operators. But as you and I have talked about, there are also concerns from the state level or the municipal level. And, we've talked about how I got my start in the legal field in the New York State Court of Claims. And so I saw all kinds of crazy actions. And for anyone who doesn't know, the New York State Court of Claims is a special jurisdiction where they only handle lawsuits against the state. And so a lot of the cases that I dealt with had to do with, there's a slip and fall in a state park, Letchworth, for instance, or somebody has been stabbed or assaulted in a state prison. And, let's take that instance, for example. You might think, well, this was a bad actor. Someone stabbed someone. Why aren't they being sued? Well, it's in a state facility. And the question is, what kinds of rules and policies were in place to prevent that? And so when you're looking at cannabis, it's been mentioned several times, this public health aspect. So, we don't want to we don't want to increase any stigma about it, and we don't want reefer madness for sure. But as we've talked about, maybe the example of somebody isn't familiar with edibles or just any type of product, and they're not using it properly. So someone takes an edible, they get a little dizzy, they're driving, and then they hit another car or they hit someone. That's the kind of issue that the state is worried about. And I understand that. As I said, I worked in the New York State Court of Claims, but I think the problem we're seeing, like we said, this issue of people are trying to get a start in this industry. They're trying to get competitive, and people are also just trying to get by. It's really hard right now. And you talk about inflation, you talk about eroding safety nets, the cost of health insurance, being on a high deductible plan.
The cost of everything
Yeah.
right now, literally.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of people in the working class with no dream of ever getting out of that. And people who are in the middle class now slipping back. It's tough in this country right now. And I think that for people in the legacy market in cannabis, that was an area where they're able to feed themselves or feed their children or pay for health care. I mean, I've been shocked by, I say I'm shocked, I'm not shocked by how many people have told me about legacy experience. And they've, there are a few where they've been around it a long time, their family is into it, they learned from their father, things like that. But I would say, and more recently, the majority of the people I talked to had a back issue, and then they couldn't deal with the healthcare costs, treatment costs, and a friend turned them on to cannabis, and they started dabbling in it, found it changed their lives, and it's changed other people's lives, and now they have a way to not only take care of their health but also support themselves. Or people who have done that so that they can, as I mentioned, feed their family. I know a lot of nurses who have gotten interested in growing and processing. So I think that it's hard. It's hard for me as someone, a person with a disability and health issues myself, and been around a lot of people and who qualify as social equity candidates. We're trying to figure out how to make it, how to survive, and cannabis was a great venue for that. And so now we're going to have to figure out, again, this legacy to legal. How are we going to make that happen, but also while balancing interests from the state and municipal level for public health and liabilities there, tort law, all of that. It gets complicated.
I know from a public health issue. And first of all, none of us should be surprised by this. We can be pissed off about it. I'm pissed off about it just like everybody else. I love the dispensaries. I love going there.
I'm not saying anything.
There's great places. A lot of them are great places run by great people, really doing their best to follow the rules and also get a head start. Because before we know it, the licenses are going to be out. There's going to be a massive influx of businesses and people. And, I do tip my hat to the people who kind of said, if you sit and wait, you're going to lose. So you get out in front of it, you take a little bit of a risk, and you do as good as business as you can, and you pay your taxes. And you hope that at the end of the day that, maybe there's an opportunity for growth, and the state, can empathize, and you guys can work together, and maybe it can be this thing. And I just feel that while, yes, there's a public health issue, okay, I get it. There's also testing infrastructure in place in the current state that could easily test all and every THC product, because if they're testing CBD products, which you have to test CBD products in order
Mhm.
to operate a CBD business,
Mhm.
you can test a THC product. I know labs in Rochester, 2 of them particularly, that are like 10 miles apart, that could probably cover the majority of the Rochester market's testing needs. Okay.
Mhm.
So if it's about testing, let's leverage existing infrastructure and at least allow the legacy market to exist in a somewhat legal fashion. But shutting down these dispensaries, I think the state's going to have a hell of a time shutting these places down, because these are people's livelihoods. There are employees, there's insurance, there's all this. They're operating like real businesses, and I think the state is up for a little bit of a fight. But let's also not forget that this is just going to fuel people back into the illicit market where it really is unregulated. At least here, the owners of these shops have a little bit of discretion of what is sold on their store shelves, and can trial and error and say, oh, this product sucked, I'm not bringing it back. Where in the underground market, it's a free for all. So I totally understand, and I'm not surprised why this happened, and I hope that, whoever's, operating is safe and nothing bad happens to anybody, but we couldn't have been surprised by this. But I
Mhm.
think that the efforts could have been, in the grand scheme of priorities of, hey, maybe we should release regulations. Hey, maybe we should offer an actual a good provisional licensing bill, or any sort of licenses. Or more importantly, maybe we should concentrate our efforts on freeing people from prison and jail for low-level cannabis crimes. Instead,
That is a priority.
our efforts are focused on shuttering down the businesses who are just trying to do business because you said it was legal. So I get it, but you have to. The frustration is real, and rightfully so. And I just feel that whenever we take, and being in the cannabis space, anybody get used to taking a step forward and 2 steps back, getting routinely kicked in the teeth, having compliance change on you on a daily basis. This is not for the faint of heart, and you are going to
Mhm.
go through I won't say a lifetime, but a, a lot of struggle through your course as a cannabis business owner. So get used to it. But I also think that, in the grand scheme of things, with all this other stuff that has to happen, this seems, in my opinion, a lower priority of, some of the other things that need to happen. But I don't also know everything that's going on at the highest level. Quite frankly, I would never want that job, and I feel bad for those folks, because it's been quite a year since it was legalized in April, and
Mhm.
they're just finally getting their feet under them. But I also think enforcement like this takes your feet out from under them, and I think it's counterproductive.
Yeah, I worry, as someone who has worked in the environmental and land use sector. I know what those penalties and fees can be like. I know what enforcement actions are like, and it's the cannabis industry isn't the same thing. Although there are actually there's a lot of crossover, which is was a big motivator for me getting involved. But I don't know how they plan on following through, what the fines could look like. I know that there was initial discussion about any type of enforcement being very different from, previous types of enforcement under prohibition. But at the same time, we have no guarantees. So I worry for people, as someone who has worked on enforcement actions, or, issues arising where somebody's getting slapped with $1,000 fees weekly because someone moved dirt improperly. And I don't mean to minimize that. There's a lot that goes into dirt laws,
Yeah.
but but you get the sense,
Yeah.
something that seems as trivial as that, and now um we're talking about businesses, we're talking about things people are consuming. It's tax
Yeah.
laws, a lot of that. And so I hope that people, I at least I hope that I can share my experiences from other parallel industries, so that can help provide some caution to people. But as I mentioned, I'm not here to judge,
Yeah.
and as I said, as a person with a disability, I
I
know
know.
how hard it is to get by. So I think that we really need to figure out ways that we can support people right now, make sure that their basic needs are met first, and also try to figure out how we can start building up those supports so we can encourage and
Yeah.
protect small business in this state.
Hey, I mean, I guess issuing CDs is better than, raids or like
Yeah, like in Jersey the
for
other day.
first time fines or
Yeah.
enforcement. So I guess a warning shot is good, because starting to fine and punish these people without any sort of warning, it would be even worse. Um, but it's frustrating. I did want to talk about this Jersey issue of what's going on about this recent raid. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So I actually, you're gonna have to cut this. I haven't looked into that enough, other than that I know that they confiscated quite a bit of product, money, and I think they're looking at criminal charges.
Wow.
Yeah. So, like I've said, even though the initial conversations and reading the law, a lot of the focus is on civil fines, and that's what the Cannabis Control Board has said. They do still have criminal laws for possession over certain limits, displaying, transferring. That is still there. And I'm not a criminal law attorney, although, I grew up around that system, and my dad was a homicide investigator. Uh, it comes down to discretion at times. And if someone is being very flagrant about it, or someone on the law enforcement side is motivated, could have an issue there.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I feel like it's kind of like a wait and see what happens type of thing, because, I have a couple of my friends own dispensaries locally. And, when I saw the letter came out, I reached out and I said, I hope everything is okay. I don't know, let me know if anything I can do to support you through the podcast. You got a message you want to get out, let me know.
Yeah, let's
Um,
focus on community right now. How
yeah,
can we help each other?
yeah,
And one of the beautiful things that I've seen in this community is the type of support. And, they've done studies on this. You see that at the lower income levels, and when I say lower, I'm saying not, upper class American, 1%, all of that. You see people are actually a lot more charitable. And I've seen Instagram posts about someone, trying to pay for car repair costs for a son going off to
yeah,
college, or somebody's had something stolen, or somebody just was diagnosed with cancer.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
amazed by the outpouring of support. So,
And this community in particular too. I
yes,
mean, this community rallies behind their own. I mean, we saw that with
yes,
the photographer gentleman who had gotten mugged outside of a pop-up
so
and
scary.
and lost all of his equipment, all that stuff.
Oh yeah,
And I think it was Rob and Jackie put together a GoFundMe and said, "Hey,
wouldn't be
wouldn't
surprised.
be surprised." Shout out to those guys.
Mm-hmm.
That within like 48 hours, 72 hours, they had raised the money to get all of his equipment back. So,
Right,
donating to a complete stranger most of the
right.
time. But because, wow, this feels like the right thing to do. We have each other's back. We share mutual interests. It makes it a lot easier to be charitable. And we're seeing that in this community
Yes,
because the community is huge.
yes.
You see it even on Instagram with, hey, our account got shut down. Help us get back our followers. Everybody posts it, and within 24 hours, people are back up to like 3,000 followers. I was like, that's not even feasible.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. As someone who works in
it's
social media too, and I do that for New York State Bar Association, and I consult people on that. I I'm blown away
yeah,
myself. I need to take a course in that. I don't
yeah,
know how you develop that.
yeah. I mean, it's really cool to see how people, and especially people in this industry, um, rally together and rally around their own. And
Yeah.
I hope that the community will rally around the people that have, taken the risk and gotten a jump start and, started a dispo or a sticker shop or a coffee shop or something like that. And maybe there's a way to continue to build that bridge without, shutting them down completely. Or, what happens if you shut down, I mean, all the people that work there, their jobs go away, the revenue goes away, the tax revenue goes
Yeah.
away. It's like, is there a better way? I don't have the answer. I'm
Yeah.
not sure anybody does, but I think that there's probably some conversations that could be had that would be more productive than saying, let's shutter the doors on all these businesses who are ultimately going to be the ones that help us bring these lofty tax goals to fruition in the future. How do we build that bridge in the meantime? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It-
I mean, I think if you look at it, is is somebody involved in this because they're trying to take care of basic needs, like we said, food, shelter, health, well-being, all those things. We need to figure out how to provide that because
Yep.
that's a huge issue across the country.
Yep.
And then for people who are trying to get into the business and feel like they can't compete with large operators, how do we support that? So even though it's tricky, it's complicated, I think those two scopes right there, we have resources and we need to build on them, and we need to move quickly to help people.
Agreed. Well, that's really the three topics that I wanted to cover today. I know that you had mentioned and you had posted something recently about Mayor Malik Evans and this article he did, or something that happened on Yahoo Finance. You want to give us a quick bird's eye view of what that was all about before we wrap up for the day?
Yeah. So I as someone who's worked as a municipal attorney, I've been so impressed by what the city of Rochester is doing. Even early on when I spoke with their planning commissioner, Gary Kirkmeyer, he told me they were developing a cannabis task force, and I'd been, I'm with the New York State Bar Association's local and state government section, and that was the first time I heard something like that. And there may have been other programs, but he was so adamant about it, and I know they have truly advanced from there to now at the point where they are working on a pilot program for universal basic income. And it sounds like they will be using, I think it was federal funding for that at the moment. But the plan, ultimately you can't rely on only that. So the plan is to use some of the revenue from cannabis eventually to help support that. And he's someone who has worked in finance for many years. He knows what he's doing. I'm really excited to see how that develops. And there have been other pilot programs in the country so far, and it's this is a very new a new type of assistance that we're looking at. Andrew Yang had his version of the program. There are different ways that you can do it, but some of the pilot programs that have been run already have actually shown incredible benefits. And there was one, I can't remember the name of it, but I think it was in California, where they saw that I think they were providing people with around $500 a month. And and this is supplemental to what they're receiving. Again, it's universal, so they're not. It's not like the Social Security disability program or some things like that. But they found that people who were receiving this were less depressed, were healthier, and actually were more motivated and more successful in finding better long-term employment.
Yeah, because I think the worry from some people on UBI is people are going to get, it'll deter people away from working.
Right.
But I think if you look at it as a supplementary income, where now not only do you have your occupational income, but the supplemental income, you can actually start to build wealth and build a bank and not live paycheck to paycheck. And that's inherently attractive to people. And nobody wants to be scraping by their whole life. Nobody wants to be.
No, yeah, that's what when people talk about in the disability program, Social Security disability, that they're just living in lap of luxury. I mean, $500 UBI. That's what people are receiving to live off of, $500 to $700 in most cases on SSI. Can you imagine trying to pay for housing, food, and a disability with all of the out-of-pocket costs and everything that goes into that? No, it's a lie when people say that. Are there maybe some instances, very small instances they found, but no, that's not the reality. And what they actually found with this program is that people were more willing to take risks in finding better employment. So maybe you have a terrible job that's exhausting you. It's affecting your health. That's becoming costly. It's making you less productive as a worker. When people had this safety net, they were able to take more risks and find better jobs. Like we talked about, jobs that are more fulfilling, better for your health, make you more productive. It actually helped more people enter the workforce. So, it's a pilot program. We'll see what happens with that. But just on so many fronts, I know that the city of Rochester is doing a lot of work, and I'm so happy to be there to support it and be involved with it, and we'll continue to do so.
And don't confuse my frustration with the state's governing body with that of the local, because being in Rochester, we are very, very lucky to have the support that we have at all levels. I mean, city council's been in our corner for a long time. Senator Cooney obviously is like Mr. Cannabis of New York. Malik Evans has like routinely, making a point to discuss cannabis and be proactive. And he's
a smart guy.
He's a smart
He's
guy.
got a smart team.
Yeah, I want to get him on here. I want to get him on here. I'm coming for you, Mayor. We're very lucky. So, be frustrated, at the state, voice your opinion respectively. Let's see if we can, get them to light a fire. But, I do believe that there is some praise to be had for our local government and our local representatives, because, a lot of the things that people have gotten away with, events and pop-ups and dispos and stuff probably wouldn't be getting, that probably wouldn't be happening in other areas to the extent that it is. And I think it's because there's a general interest in cannabis, rightfully so. So, I'll get off my soapbox, but I am very proud to be a Rochesterian, and I very much am happy to have the support and representation that we do. I think that we're probably represented from a cannabis perspective, probably better than anyone in the state.
Flower City, right?
Flower City. It's a thing. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Always good to see you and chat with you.
Thank you. Always happy to be here.
Yeah, we'll have to catch up soon. Everybody, thanks for tuning in today and hearing a little bit of our frustrations. We got a whole lot of education today from our good friend Rachel Partington of Park Jordan Real Estate. I want to give a special thank you and shout out to my sponsor, JD Chapman. They are the go-to insurance agency for cannabis businesses. If you're an aspiring entrepreneur, if you're looking to get in the space, you're going to need insurance, and there's only one firm that I could recommend, and that's JD Chapman. Thanks for supporting our show and partnering with us. And for everybody else, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Thanks to our friends here at Rockbox Recording and Production in Rochester, New York. They are a full professional podcast and video studio designed by a radio guy for podcasters. Audio, video, voiceovers, editing, whatever. Mouth off at Rockbox at rockbox.com.
You can follow Cannabis Cum Laude on LinkedIn and all other social media platforms, as well as Cannabis. And if you'd like to help support the show, search up Cannabis Cum Laude on Patreon. And of course, all of those links are in the show notes. Thanks for watching and listening.